Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood on the bridge of the battleship Resolute and watched the stars burn. The Meridian Nebula stretched across the viewport like a wound in space, purple and red gases swirling around newborn stars. It was beautiful. It was also about to become a graveyard. "All ships report ready, Admiral," her executive officer said. Commander Davis was a tall man with gray hair and steady hands. He had served with Tanaka for 11 years. "The Valkyrie fleet is in position on our starboard flank." Tanaka nodded. 47 human warships floated in formation round the Resolute. Beyond them, 120 Valkyrie vessels held their positions. The alliance had worked well for 12 years now. Humanity had provided the soldiers and the courage. The Valkyrie had provided the ships and the intelligence. Together, they had pushed the Scourge Collective back from a dozen worlds. Today would be the decisive battle. The Scourge had gathered their remaining forces here at Meridian. If the Alliance could break them today, the war would effectively be over. "Signal from High Marshal Drovax," the communications officer announced. The main screen flickered, and the face of a Valkyrie commander appeared. Drovax had gray-blue skin, and for eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on his face. His lipless mouth curved into what passed for a smile among his people. "Admiral Tanaka," Drovax said, "my compliments on your fleet's positioning. The Scourge will break against us like waves against stone." "Let's hope so, High Marshal," Tanaka replied. "My ships will take the center. We'll punch through their line and scatter their formation. Your fleet can then sweep in and finish them. An excellent plan. The Dominion is proud to fight alongside humanity today." The transmission ended. Tanaka turned back to the viewport. Something felt wrong. She had learned to trust her instincts over 30 years of military service. Right now, those instincts were screaming at her. "Davis," she said quietly, "make sure our escape vectors are plotted and ready." The commander raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He simply nodded and moved to the navigation station. The Scourge fleet appeared on sensors 20 minutes later. Over 200 vessels of varying sizes, their hulls covered in the organic growths that marked collective technology. They moved with perfect coordination, like a single organism rather than individual ships. "All ships, advance," Tanaka ordered. The human fleet surged forward. Behind them, the Valkyrie vessels followed at a slower pace. Tanaka noticed this but said nothing. Perhaps they were being cautious. Perhaps they wanted the humans to absorb the initial enemy fire. The first exchange of weapons fire lit up the nebula. Human railguns sent tungsten slugs at incredible speeds toward the Scourge ships. Energy beams crisscrossed the void. Explosions bloomed in the darkness as ships on both sides took damage. "Forward elements are engaging," Davis reported. "The destroyers hammer and forge report direct hits on enemy cruisers." Tanaka watched the tactical display. Her ships were doing well. They were pushing into the Scourge formation, creating chaos and disorder. Now was the time for the Valkyrie to strike the enemy flanks. "Where is Drovax?" she asked. The tactical officer frowned at his console. "The Valkyrie fleet is. They're moving, Admiral. But not toward the enemy." Tanaka felt ice form in her stomach. "Show me." The display shifted. The Valkyrie fleet was repositioning, but not to attack the Scourge. They were moving behind the human formation. They were blocking the escape routes. "Get me Drovax," Tanaka ordered. Now, the High Marshal's face appeared on screen again. This time, there was no pretense of friendship in his expression. "Admiral Tanaka," Drovax said, "I regret to inform you that the Dominion has reached a new understanding with the Scourge Collective. Your species has been a useful tool, but tools can be replaced. You treacherous, please. Admiral, this is simply politics. The Collective has agreed to spare Valkyrie worlds in exchange for delivering your fleet to them. Your people made excellent soldiers, but you made poor diplomats. You trusted us." Tanaka cut the transmission. "All ships, emergency formation. We need to break through the Valkyrie line." But it was already too late. The Scourge, no longer facing resistance from the Valkyrie ships, concentrated their entire force on the human fleet. At the same time, the Valkyrie vessels opened fire from behind. The destroyer Hammer vanished in a ball of flame. The cruiser Defiant broke apart under combined fire. Tanaka watched in horror as ship after ship died on her tactical display. "The Righteous is gone," Davis reported. his voice cracking. "The Vigilant is reporting critical damage. We've lost the carrier Jefferson. 17 ships died in the first 5 minutes of the betrayal. 4,000 souls, men and women who had trusted their allies, wiped out in moments. Find me a gap," Tanaka said. Her voice was cold now, controlled. She would mourn later. Right now, she had to save whoever she could. "There has to be a weak point in their formation." The tactical officer worked frantically. "There," he said finally. "A narrow corridor between the Scourge left flank and the Valkyrie right. If we burn hard, we might make it. All surviving ships, follow the Resolute," Tanaka ordered. "Maximum acceleration. We're punching through." The remaining 23 human vessels turned as one and raced toward the gap. The Scourge and Valkyrie fired everything they had. 3 more ships fell during the desperate run. The cruiser Tempest took a direct hit to its engines and dropped out of formation, doomed. Tanaka gripped the arms of her command chair as the Resolute shuddered under enemy fire. Alarms screamed. Damage reports flooded in. But the gap was getting closer. "Brace for jump," the navigation officer shouted. The Resolute hit the jump point and reality twisted around it. Stars stretched into lines. The ship groaned under the stress of emergency faster-than-light travel. And then they were through, emerging into unknown space far from the battlefield. One by one, the surviving ships reported in. 20 vessels had made it. 20 out of 47. Almost half the fleet, gone in less than an hour. "Admiral," the communications officer said. Her face was pale. "We're picking up emergency beacons from the battle site. Escape pods. Hundreds of them." Tanaka closed her eyes. The pods would be collected by the Scourge. Over 4,000 human personnel were now prisoners of the Collective. She knew what the Scourge did to prisoners. The thought made her sick. "Can we go back?" Davis asked. "No." The word tasted like ash in her mouth. "We'd be throwing away more lives. We need to warn Earth. We need to—" Incoming transmission. The communications officer interrupted. It's High Marshal Drovax." The screen activated without Tanaka's permission. Drovax's face appeared, and he was smiling broadly now. "Admiral Tanaka," he said, "I wanted to personally wish you farewell. You fought well today. Your people always fight well. That's what made you such useful pawns. This isn't over, Drovax." The Valkyrie laughed. "Oh, I think it is. What will you do? Attack us? You've just lost half your fleet. Attack the Scourge. They'll consume what's left of you." "No, Admiral. This is exactly over. Your kind was always expendable. Please thank your leaders for being so trusting. I'm going to remember this day." Tanaka said quietly. "I'm going to remember every ship we lost, every name, every face, and I'm going to make sure humanity remembers too. Threats from a defeated commander." "How sad." Drovax leaned forward. "Run home, Admiral. Tell your people what happened. Let them know that the galaxy has no place for species that are too naive to see betrayal coming. Perhaps in a century or two, we'll allow you back into civilized space. As servants, of course." The transmission ended. Tanaka sat in silence for a long moment. Around her, the bridge crew waited. Some were crying. Others stared at nothing, their faces blank with shock. "Save that transmission," Tanaka finally said. "Every word, every image. Save it all, Admiral." Davis asked. "Set course for Earth, Commander. Maximum speed." She stood up slowly, like an old woman carrying an impossible weight. "The High Marshal is wrong about one thing. This isn't over. It's just beginning." She walked to the viewport and stared out at the unfamiliar stars. Behind her, the crew began to work, setting course for home. Ahead of her lay months of travel. Then would come the reports, the investigations, the grief. But after the grief would come something else. Tanaka had seen it before in human history. When her people were hurt, truly hurt, they didn't simply strike back blindly. They planned. They prepared. They made sure that whoever had hurt them would never be able to do it again. Drovax thought he had eliminated a threat today. He had no idea that he had just awakened something far more dangerous than a military enemy. He had awakened humanity's full attention, and humanity always collected its debts. The Resolute jumped to faster-than-light speed, carrying its wounded crew toward Earth. Behind them, the Meridian Nebula continued to glow, beautiful and indifferent. keeping no memory of the blood that had been spilled in its light. But Admiral Yuki Tanaka would remember. She would remember it all. And in time, so would the entire galaxy. The first chapter of humanity's revenge had been written in the deaths of their soldiers. The remaining chapters, Tanaka swore to herself, would be written in something far more valuable than blood. They would be written in everything the Velthri held dear. 3 months after the Battle of Meridian Nebula, the galaxy waited for humanity to explode. Every major power expected the same thing. The humans would launch a massive counterattack. They would throw their remaining fleets at the Velthri Dominion in a desperate war of revenge. They would burn themselves out against 2 enemies at once, weakening themselves until they were no longer a threat to anyone. The Velthri were ready for this. High Marshal Drovax had positioned defensive fleets at every major world. He had strengthened alliances with neutral powers. He had even begun construction of new warships to replace any losses the human counterattack might cause. But the counterattack never came. Instead, something strange happened. Human space went quiet. Their borders closed. Trade routes that had carried goods between human and Velthri worlds for over a decade suddenly stopped operating. Human embassies across the galaxy recalled their staff. Commercial vessels returned to Earth and stayed there. The Terran Republic had simply withdrawn from galactic affairs. Drovax received reports of this with confusion that slowly turned to contempt. The humans were cowards, he decided. They were hiding in their little corner of space, licking their wounds, too afraid to fight. The great human military machine that had been the backbone of the Alliance against the Scourge had revealed itself to be nothing more than paper tigers. The Dominion Council awarded Drovax expanded authority over military affairs. He was celebrated as the leader who had eliminated humanity as a galactic power, without losing a single Velthri ship to direct combat. Statues were commissioned. Songs were written. Young Velthri officers studied his tactics as examples of perfect strategy. On the Velthri homeworld of Velter Prime, celebrations continued for weeks. The future looked bright. With the humans contained and the Scourged satisfied with their bargain, the Dominion could expand into the power vacuum. In a generation, they would be the dominant force in this region of the galaxy. Drovax stood on the balcony of his estate and looked up at the stars, imagining all the worlds that would soon belong to his people. He had gambled everything on the betrayal, and he had won. Or so he believed. What the Velthri did not see, could not see, was happening inside human space. Behind those closed borders, something unprecedented was taking place. Every major government in human territory met in emergency session. Corporations that had been rivals for generations agreed to cooperate. Political parties that had opposed each other for decades found common cause. Military leaders, civilian leaders, and economic experts gathered in the same rooms and worked toward the same goals. The Emergency Economic Warfare Act passed through the Terran Assembly, without a single vote against it. The document gave the government extraordinary powers over trade, finance, and industrial production. Any company that refused to participate would lose its operating license. Any individual who leaked information would face charges of treason. Military production shifted to maximum capacity, but not in the way the Velthri expected. Yes, new warships were being built, but they were being built slowly, carefully, and in secret. The first wave of humanity's response would not be made of steel and fire. It would be made of numbers on screens, contracts and agreements, debts and obligations. Director Sarah Chen led the Economic Intelligence Division. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a mind that worked faster than most computers. Before the betrayal, she had been responsible for tracking trade relationships throughout the galaxy. Now she had been given a new mission. Find everything, the Assembly had told her. Every connection, every dependency, everything the Velthri need from us. Chen and her team worked without sleep for weeks. They analyzed 12 years of alliance records. They traced every trade agreement, every joint venture, every technology license, every loan, every insurance policy, every shipping contract. What they found was extraordinary. The Velthri had not realized how deeply their economy had become intertwined with humanity's. The alliance had seemed like a military partnership, but it had grown into so much more. Velthri banks held deposits in human financial institutions. Velthri companies licensed human patents for everything from medical equipment to starship navigation systems. Velthri agricultural exports traveled through human shipping lanes because human routes were faster and cheaper. Chen compiled her findings into a single report. When she presented it to the assembly, the room fell silent. 17 trillion credits, she said. That's the value of Velthri assets that we can directly affect. Their banking system has 4 trillion credits in exposure to human markets. Their pharmaceutical industry licenses 63% of its core technology from human firms. Their entire agricultural export sector depends on our shipping infrastructure. The assembly chairman leaned forward. What are you saying, Director? I'm saying that we don't need to fire a single shot. Chen smiled, and there was no warmth in it. The Velthri built their prosperity on top of ours. They forgot that foundations can be removed. Admiral Tanaka was present at the meeting. She had spent the past 3 months writing letters to the families of those who had died at Meridian. She had attended funerals until the grief became a physical weight in her chest. Now she listened to Chen's presentation with growing interest. Will this work? Tanaka asked. Can we really hurt them without military force? Admiral, we can do more than hurt them. Chen pulled up a new display. We can dismantle their entire civilization. Not through destruction, but through deprivation. We built them up over 12 years. We can take it all away in 12 months. The assembly voted unanimously. The plan was approved. Over the following weeks, humanity began to move. Not with warships, but with lawyers and accountants and trade officials. The war against the Velthri would be fought in conference rooms and financial markets. It would be waged with contracts and regulations and carefully worded demands. The first actions were small. Human banks sent letters to Velthri borrowers reminding them of upcoming loan payments. Human companies began reviewing their licensing agreements. Human shipping firms announced minor schedule changes. The Velthri noticed none of it. Why would they? These were routine business matters, handled by minor officials. The High Marshal was busy planning the expansion of his territory. The Dominion Council was discussing which human border worlds to claim. Once the humans fully collapsed, they had no idea what was coming. On Earth, Admiral Tanaka met with Director Chen in a secure room far beneath the government complex. How long until we're ready? Tanaka asked. The full operation begins in 3 months, Chen replied. We need that time to coordinate everything. When we move, it all has to happen at once. If we give them time to react, they might find ways to soften the blow. Tanaka nodded. And the prisoners? The ones the scourge took? Chen's expression softened slightly. That's phase 2. Once the Velthri are too weak to interfere, we can negotiate with the collective from a position of strength. The scourge are logical. They'll trade our people back if we make it worth their while. Make it happen. Tanaka stood up. I made a promise to those people. I told them I'd bring them home. We will, Admiral. But first, we need to make sure that when we're done with the Velthri, they'll never be able to threaten us again. Tanaka walked to the window. Outside, the sun was setting over the capital city. Children played in parks. Families gathered for evening meals. Life went on, despite the losses, despite the grief. Drovax thought he understood us, Tanaka said quietly. He thought we would react with emotion, attack blindly, waste ourselves against his defenses. He underestimated us. No. Tanaka turned back to face Chen. He didn't understand us at all. We're not just good at war. We're good at everything we decide to focus on. And right now, every single human being is focused on one thing, making them pay, making them understand. Tanaka's eyes were hard. We trusted them. We fought beside them. We bled for them. And they sold us like cattle. When we're done, every species in the galaxy will know the cost of betraying humanity. Chen nodded. The operation has a name now. The assembly approved it this morning. What did they choose? Chen smiled grimly. They're calling it the harvest, because we're going to collect everything the Velthri owe us. Outside, the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Drovax was celebrating his victory, unaware that the real war hadn't even begun. In 3 months, the Velthri would wake up to discover that their entire civilization had been built on borrowed time, and the bill was about to come due. The day the world ended for the Velthri Dominion began like any other. Minister Kovacs of Economic Affairs arrived at his office on Velter Prime. Just as the sun rose over the capital city, he was a middle-aged Velthri with the calm demeanor of someone who had spent decades managing numbers and contracts. His job had always been boring but important. He made sure the money flowed where it needed to go. His assistant was waiting for him with an unusual expression, something between confusion and fear. "Minister," she said, "there are messages, many messages, from everywhere." Kovacs took his seat and activated his console. What he saw made his eyes blink rapidly in disbelief. The messages had started arriving at midnight. They came from human banks, human corporations, human shipping companies, human insurance firms, human patent offices. Thousands of messages, all arriving within the same hour. He opened the first one. It was from the Terran Central Bank. Notice of default. All loans extended to Velthri entities are hereby called in full. Payment is due within 30 standard days. Failure to comply will result in asset seizure and legal action. Kovacs opened the next message. This one was from the Huang Pharmaceutical Corporation. Notice of license termination. All technology licensing agreements with Velthri medical institutions are terminated effective immediately. Continued use of licensed technology constitutes intellectual property theft and will be prosecuted. The next message was from Stellar Shipping Consolidated. Notice of service suspension. All shipping contracts with Velthri clients are suspended indefinitely. Vessels currently carrying Velthri cargo will return to port of origin. Cargo may be collected upon payment of outstanding fees. Kovacs kept reading. Every message was the same pattern: termination, default, suspension, cancellation. The humans were pulling out of every agreement, calling in every debt, cutting every connection all at once. He reached for his communicator with shaking hands and called the finance secretary. The line was busy. He tried the trade minister, also busy. He tried the central bank governor, no answer. His assistant appeared in the doorway. "Minister, there's a crowd forming outside. Business owners. They say the human companies have frozen their accounts." Kovacs ran to the window. The street below was filling with people. Velthri citizens holding paper documents, shouting, demanding answers. More were arriving every minute. On the other side of the city, High Marshal Drovax received an emergency summons to the Dominion Council chambers. He arrived to find chaos. Councilors were shouting at each other. Aides rushed back and forth with reports. The normally dignified chamber looked like a marketplace during a fire. "What is happening?" Drovax demanded. The council chairman turned to him with haunted eyes. "The humans. They've launched an attack. An attack." Drovax straightened. "Where?" "I've received no reports of military activity." "Not military." The chairman handed him a tablet. "Economic. They've called in every loan, canceled every contract, terminated every license, all at once, simultaneously, across every Velthri world and business." Drovax scrolled through the reports. The numbers were staggering. 4 trillion credits in loans now due immediately. Medical facilities shutting down because they could no longer legally use their equipment. Ships stranded in ports because their insurance had been canceled. Factories going silent because their navigation computers were human technology that could no longer be operated. "This is impossible," Drovax said. "They can't do this, they can. We signed the contracts. We agreed to the terms. The humans had termination clauses in everything. We never thought they'd actually use them. Then we refused to pay. We ignore their demands." The finance secretary stepped forward. She looked like she had aged a decade overnight. "High Marshal, if we refuse to honor our obligations, no one will ever do business with us again. Our currency will become worthless on galactic markets. No neutral power will extend us credit. We'll be completely isolated. We're the Dominion. We're a major galactic power. We were a major galactic power." The secretary's voice was bitter. "We built our economy on human foundations. We used their banks because they were convenient. We licensed their technology because it was cheaper than developing our own. We shipped through their routes because they were efficient. We never imagined they would weaponize it all." Over the following days, the full scale of the disaster became clear. Hospitals began running out of medicine. The drugs they manufactured used human-patented processes. Without licenses, production was illegal. They could continue and face galactic sanctions, or they could stop and watch patients die. Most stopped. Agricultural worlds found their exports rotting in warehouses. Human shipping companies had handled 90% of Velthri trade. Those ships were gone now, recalled to human space. Velthri shipping capacity was nowhere near sufficient to replace them. Factories shut down one by one. Navigation systems, communication arrays, power management computers, all licensed from human firms, all now illegal to use. Workers went home with no idea if they would ever return. The financial markets collapsed within a week. The Velthri credit, once stable and respected, became worthless. Savings vanished. Investments evaporated. Retirement funds disappeared. And through it all, the humans said nothing. No demands, no threats, no negotiations. They simply collected what they were owed and waited. Drovax demanded military action. He would teach the humans the cost of this economic warfare. He would burn their worlds until they begged for mercy. But when he called his admirals to plan the attack, they gave him devastating news. Our fleet is dependent on human technology. High Marshal, Admiral Vortex reported. Navigation systems, targeting computers, engine management software, all human designs. We have enough spare parts and technical knowledge to operate for perhaps 8 months of active campaigning. After that, our ships become useless. Then we have 8 months to win. Win against whom? The humans have retreated behind their borders. Their defensive positions are strong. We would need years to break through, not months. And while we're attacking them, the Admiral paused. What? The Scourge, High Marshal. They've been probing our border colonies for the past week. Without a strong military presence to discourage them, they may decide that their agreement with us is no longer convenient. Drovax felt cold fear wash through him. The Scourge had honored their bargain only because the Dominion had been strong. A weakened Velthri state might look less like an ally and more like a meal. Surely they won't turn on us. We gave them the humans. The Scourge do not understand loyalty, High Marshal. They understand power. And right now, we are losing power by the hour. 1 month into the crisis, the humans finally spoke. A single announcement, broadcast across all galactic channels. The Terran Republic offers the following terms to any Velthri world that wishes to end this conflict. Surrender unconditionally. Accept human administration of your territory. Deliver to human custody all officials responsible for the Meridian betrayal. In exchange, you will receive humanitarian aid, economic stabilization, and protection from the Scourge Collective. This offer has no expiration date. We can wait. Drovax watched the broadcast with barely contained rage. They think we'll surrender? Our own worlds will never accept human rule. But he was wrong. The colony world of Theraxis had been hit particularly hard by the crisis. It was an agricultural planet that exported 90% of its food production. Without human shipping, that food was rotting in storage silos while the colonists watched helplessly. The colonial governor, a practical woman named Sereth, called a public referendum. The question was simple: continue under Dominion rule and starve, or accept human terms and survive. The vote was not close. 83% of Theraxis citizens chose survival. Sereth transmitted the colony's surrender to Earth and requested humanitarian assistance. Human ships arrived within days, carrying food, medicine, and engineers to repair critical infrastructure. The colonists watched in amazement as their oppressors became their saviors. Drovax responded to the news of Theraxis with fury. He ordered the governor's family, who still lived on Vultur Prime, arrested and executed as traitors. The executions were broadcast across the Dominion as a warning to other worlds that might consider defection. It was the worst possible decision. On 12 different worlds, citizens watched the executions and saw not justice, but desperation. The Dominion was killing innocent family members because it couldn't prevent its territories from leaving. This was not the action of a strong government. This was the action of a dying one. Within a week, 3 more worlds announced they were considering the human offer. Protests erupted on a dozen others. The Dominion security forces, already stretched thin, could not be everywhere at once. Director Chen monitored all of this from Earth with quiet satisfaction. The plan was working better than expected. Every Valkyrie reaction made things worse. Every attempt to maintain control pushed more worlds toward surrender. Admiral Tanaka stood beside her, watching the reports flow in. "How long?" Tanaka asked. "Until it's over. The Dominion will survive in some form," Chen replied. "But it will be a shadow of itself. A year from now, they'll control maybe a quarter of their current territory, and they'll be completely dependent on whatever aid we choose to give them." 14 months after the Battle of Meridian Nebula, the Valkyrie Dominion was dying. 12 worlds had surrendered to humanity. Another 8 were in open revolt against Dominion authority. The Scourge Collective, sensing weakness, had conquered 3 border systems and was probing deeper into Valkyrie territory. The economy had contracted by 60%. Unemployment was massive. Food shortages were common. Medicine was scarce. On Velter Prime, High Marshal Drovax sat in his darkened office and stared at maps that showed his crumbling empire. The walls were covered with charts and reports and desperate plans, all of them failures. Everything he tried made things worse. Every decision led to new disasters. His own people had started calling him the architect of ruin. The door opened and Admiral Vortax entered. The naval commander looked exhausted. He had aged terribly over the past year, his gray-blue skin now lined with deep wrinkles. "High Marshal, we have reports from the border. The Scourge have destroyed the colony on Vestron 3. No survivors." Drovax closed his eyes. Vestron 3 had held 2,000,000 Valkyrie citizens. Gone now, consumed by the same enemy he had allied with against humanity. "And our response? We have no ships to spare, High Marshal. Every vessel is either defending Velter Prime or trying to prevent more worlds from defecting." "Then what do you suggest, Admiral? That we simply wait to be devoured?" Vortax hesitated. "There's another option, one I never thought I would suggest. Speak, surrender, to the humans. Accept their terms. Their protection would extend to the remaining Dominion worlds. They could stop the Scourge where we cannot." Drovax slammed his fist on the desk. "I will not surrender to those primitive apes. I would rather watch the Dominion burn. The Dominion is already burning. High Marshal." Vortax's voice was quiet but firm. "You set the fire. You cannot control it now." Before Drovax could respond, an alert flashed on his console. New contact in Valkyrie space. Many contacts. The humans had finally sent their fleet, but they hadn't come to fight. Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood on the bridge of the Resolute and watched her fleet spread across the former Dominion. 200 warships, the largest force humanity had ever assembled. Behind them came supply vessels, construction ships, administrative transports. They were not here to destroy. They were here to collect. "Begin systematic occupation of all surrendered territories," Tanaka ordered. "Secure former Valkyrie assets as outlined in the acquisition documents. Any resistance is to be handled with minimum force." The operation was almost peaceful. Human ships arrived at world after world, and the populations welcomed them. After a year of starvation and chaos, the humans represented stability, safety, hope. Engineering teams landed and began repairing damaged infrastructure. Supply convoys delivered food and medicine to populations that had gone months without either. Administrators set up provisional governments that actually worked. On the conquered worlds, Valkyrie citizens watched in amazement as their former enemies treated them with dignity. There were no mass arrests, no revenge killings, no punishment for ordinary people. The humans simply took over and made things better. But for those who had participated in the betrayal, there would be no mercy. Director Chen had spent months building cases against every Valkyrie official involved in the Meridian massacre. She had evidence, recordings of communications, financial records showing bribes from the Scourge, testimony from defectors. The documentation was overwhelming. A galactic tribunal was convened. Judges from 12 neutral species would hear the cases. The defendants included military officers, intelligence agents, diplomats, anyone who had known about the betrayal in advance. The star defendant was High Marshal Drovax himself. He was captured when Velter Prime finally fell, 3 weeks after the human fleet arrived. The Dominion Council had voted to surrender, after Scourge ships were detected approaching the homeworld. The choice was simple: accept human rule or be consumed by the collective. They chose humanity. Drovax was found in his estate, alone, abandoned by everyone who had once celebrated him. He offered no resistance when human soldiers came to arrest him. He simply asked if he could bring a picture of his family with him. Tanaka was present when they brought him aboard the Resolute. She stood in the landing bay and watched as the architect of her greatest defeat was led past her in restraints. Their eyes met. "Admiral," Drovax said. His voice was calm, almost peaceful. "You came to gloat." "No." Tanaka fell into step beside him as the guards led him to a holding cell. "I came to understand." "Understand what?" "Why you did it. You could have told us you wanted out of the Alliance. We would have negotiated a separation. Instead, you murdered for thousands of my people." Drovax was silent for a moment. "The Scourge offered us a guarantee. Your destruction for our safety. It seemed like a good trade at the time, and now I see that I traded everything for nothing. The Scourge honored their agreement only until it suited them to break it, just as I broke my agreement with you." He laughed bitterly. "I suppose there's a lesson in that." "There is." Tanaka stopped walking. The guards waited. When you negotiate with monsters, you become food the moment you're no longer useful. Humanity could have told you that. If you had bothered to ask. The trial lasted 2 months. The evidence was presented methodically, thoroughly. Witness after witness testified about the planning, the execution, the knowledge that thousands would die. Drovax admitted everything. He offered no defense, no excuses. When asked why, he simply said, "I thought I was protecting my people. I was wrong. I destroyed them instead." The verdict was unanimous. Guilty of war crimes. Guilty of conspiracy to commit mass murder. Guilty of crimes against peace. The sentence was life imprisonment on a human-controlled facility. He would spend his remaining years watching the consequences of his choices unfold. On the day before the sentence was carried out, Tanaka visited Drovax in his cell. She had requested the meeting, though she was not entirely sure why. The former High Marshal sat on a simple bed, looking at the metal walls of his tiny room. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, like a balloon slowly losing air. "You're here again," he said without looking up. "I am, still trying to understand." Tanaka sat on the chair opposite him. "You thought betraying us would make your people safe. I want you to see what actually happened." She activated a display screen and showed him images. The destroyed Dominion worlds, the starving populations, the refugee camps, the mass graves on planets consumed by the Scourge. "This is your legacy," she said. "Everything you did was supposed to protect them. Instead, you handed them to their enemies on a silver plate." Drovax watched the images in silence. When they ended, he finally looked at her. "Why are you showing me this? To torture me?" "No, to explain why we're taking everything." Tanaka leaned forward. "You need to understand that this isn't vengeance. This is education. The galaxy needs to see what happens when someone betrays humanity. Not destruction, reconstruction. Under our control. By our rules, you're making an example of us. Yes, so that no one ever tries this again." She stood up. "We're not taking everything because we're greedy. We're taking everything because you need to understand that trust, once broken, has a price beyond calculation, and if I had honored the Alliance." Tanaka paused at the door. "Then right now, you'd be a hero who helped defeat the Scourge. Your people would be prosperous and secure, and thousands of good soldiers, human and Velthri both, would still be alive." She left him alone with his thoughts and his guilt. The next day, she turned her attention to the other half of her mission. The Scourge still held human prisoners. It was time to bring them home. Negotiations with the collective were surprisingly simple. The Scourge were intelligent enough to recognize a losing position. Humanity had dismantled a major galactic power without firing a shot. The collective did not want to become the next target. They agreed to return all surviving prisoners in exchange for humanity's neutrality in any future Scourge expansion away from human territory. Tanaka accepted the terms. She would have agreed to far more. The prisoner exchange took place at a neutral station. 2,300 humans walked off Scourge transports, blinking in the unfamiliar light. They were thin, scarred, traumatized, but they were alive. Tanaka greeted each one personally. She shook hands, offered embraces, told them that they were going home. Many wept, some could not speak at all. When the last prisoner had been processed, she stood at a viewport and watched the scourge ships depart. She had promised to bring her people home. She had kept that promise. Now there was only one thing left to do: build something better on the ashes of what had been destroyed. 3 years after the Battle of Meridian Nebula, Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood before a memorial wall that stretched for half a kilometer. The wall was made of black stone polished to a mirror shine. On its surface, carved in letters of gold, were names. 4,217 names. Every human who had died in the betrayal. Behind the wall, a garden grew. Trees from Earth, flowers from a dozen colonies. Plants that represented every world that had sent soldiers to die in the Meridian Nebula. It was peaceful here, quiet, a place for remembering. Tanaka came every year on the anniversary. She read the names aloud, all of them, even though it took hours. She owed them that much. Today was different. Today, she was not alone. A crowd had gathered for the dedication ceremony. Thousands of humans stood in respectful silence, but among them were other faces, Velthri faces, gray-blue skin and fur eyes, watching with expressions of solemnity and shame. The galaxy had changed in 3 years. What remained of the Velthri Dominion was a quarter of its former size. 17 worlds still called themselves independent Velthri territory, but they were poor, weak, and completely dependent on human aid shipments to prevent mass starvation. The proud species that had once commanded over 100 systems now struggled to maintain basic services. The rest had become the Meridian Protectorate's former Velthri worlds, now under human administration. Millions of Velthri lived there, worked there, raised families there, and by almost every measure, they lived better than their independent kin. Human administrators had rebuilt the infrastructure. Human engineers had restored power and water and transportation. Human teachers staffed schools that educated Velthri children alongside human colonists. Human doctors ran hospitals that treated everyone regardless of species. It was not a paradise. There were tensions, conflicts, resentments. Some Velthri hated living under human rule. Some humans could not forgive what had been done to their people. But the basic fact remained: life in the Protectorates was better than life in the Rump Dominion. And that was deliberate. Tanaka finished reading the names as the sun began to set. She placed her hand on the cold stone and closed her eyes. She could almost hear them, all those voices silenced 3 years ago. Young officers and veteran soldiers, engineers and pilots and medical staff, people who had trusted their allies and paid the ultimate price for that trust. She stepped back and turned to face the crowd. 3 years ago, she said, her voice carrying across the garden, we suffered a wound that should have destroyed us. Our allies betrayed us. Our soldiers were slaughtered. Our trust was used as a weapon against us. The crowd was silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Every species in the galaxy expected us to react with blind rage. They expected us to throw ourselves against our enemies until nothing remained but ashes and regret. They thought they understood humans. They thought we were simple creatures, driven by emotion, incapable of patience. She paused, looking out at the faces before her, human and Velthri alike. They were wrong. We didn't burn our enemies. We didn't destroy in mindless fury. Instead, we did something far more difficult. We planned, we prepared, we built, and when we were ready, we didn't take their lives. We took their future. The Velthri Dominion thought they could sacrifice us for their safety. Now they are weaker than they have ever been, dependent on our mercy for their survival. The Scourge thought they could use us as a bargaining chip. Now they know that any attack on humanity will be met not just with military force, but with the complete dismantling of everything they have built. This is not revenge. Revenge is quick and hot and ultimately pointless. This is consequence. This is the galaxy learning that humanity is not to be betrayed. Not because we are cruel, but because we never forget. We never forgive without accountability. And we never stop until the scales are balanced. She gestured toward the Velthri in the crowd. Some of you were our enemies. Your government tried to destroy us. But today, you live in peace under our protection. Your children go to schools we built. Your sick are healed in hospitals we run. This is also deliberate. We don't want to rule through fear. We want to rule through being genuinely better. We want every species in the galaxy to look at the protectorates and see what humanity offers. Betray us, and we will take everything you have. But cooperate with us, and we will build something better together. That is the human way. That is why we will endure when empires like the Old Dominion fade into history. After the ceremony, a young Velthri diplomat approached Tanaka. Her name was Kayla, and she had been born 2 years before the betrayal. She had grown up in the protectorates, educated in human schools, raised in a world shaped by human administration. "Admiral," Kayla said, her voice respectful, "may I ask you a question?" Tanaka nodded. "Of course. Why didn't you simply destroy us? After what High Marshal Drovax did, you had every right to burn our worlds. Your people would have supported it. No one would have blamed you." Tanaka considered the question carefully. It was one she had asked herself many times over the years. "Because that's what they expected," she finally said. "Drovax planned the betrayal believing that we would react with blind fury. He thought we would waste our strength in a hopeless war of revenge. He thought our anger would be our weakness, but you didn't give him that. No, we gave him something far worse. We gave him patience." Tanaka looked up at the memorial wall, at all those golden names. Every soldier whose name is carved on that wall trusted their allies. They fought and died believing they were part of something larger than themselves. If we had responded with mindless destruction, their sacrifice would have meant nothing, so you built instead. We took everything the Velthri had stolen from us: security, trust, the lives of our people, and we took it back with interest. Not through fire, but through economics and politics and careful planning. In the end, we didn't just defeat the Dominion. We absorbed it. We made it ours." Kayla was quiet for a moment. "Some of my people hate you for this. They say living under human rule is a humiliation. And what do you think?" The young diplomat hesitated. I think my grandmother's generation brought this upon themselves. They gambled with human lives and lost everything. Now my generation has a choice. We can cling to old pride and old hatreds, or we can accept that the galaxy has changed and try to build something new." Tanaka smiled slightly. "That's a wise perspective. I learned it in a human school." They stood together as the last light faded from the sky. The names on the memorial wall glowed softly in the darkness, each one a reminder of the cost of betrayal. "Admiral," Kayla said, "do you think there will ever be true peace between our peoples? Not just the absence of war, but genuine trust?" Tanaka thought of Drovax, still imprisoned, watching the consequences of his choices unfold. She thought of the thousands of Velthri children being educated alongside human students. She thought of the mixed crews that now served on some vessels, human and Velthri working together. "Not in my lifetime," she admitted. "Perhaps not in yours. Trust takes generations to build and moments to destroy. Your leaders destroyed it at Meridian. Rebuilding it will be the work of your grandchildren and their grandchildren. But you think it's possible?" "I think humanity doesn't give up." Tanaka turned to face her fully. "We don't forget, but we can learn to forgive. One day, a Velthri admiral might stand where I'm standing, honoring their own dead alongside ours. One day, our species might fight together again, as true allies this time, without secrets or betrayals." That's a beautiful thought. It's the only thought that makes any of this worthwhile. Tanaka began walking back toward the lights of the city. "We didn't take everything the Velthri had just to watch it crumble. We took it to build something better, something that will last." She paused and looked back at the memorial one final time. "They betrayed us in battle," she said quietly. "So we took everything they had. But what we're building on those ruins, that will be our true victory. Not conquest, not revenge, legacy." The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal. Somewhere among them, the Scourge Collective watched and waited, newly cautious about a species that had proven far more dangerous than they appeared. On 100 worlds, humans and Velthri went about their lives, building new futures on the foundations of old tragedy. And on Velter Prime, in a cell with no windows, High Marshal Drovax sat alone with his memories and his regret, a living monument to the cost of underestimating humanity. The galaxy had learned its lesson. When you betray humanity, you don't just lose a battle, you lose everything. But what replaces it might just be worth the pain.